Ladies and gentlemen, for years, for the entire time that we've existed as a state, Utah's public lands have been a treasured heritage for all of us. For many years, decades even, the question of how to best manage Utah's lands has been at the forefront of our state's critical issues. We've collaborated, we've argued, we've negotiated, we've even fought about how different parcels of land should be used. The crazy thing is that all this time, we have not had control of nearly 70% of our land. I want you to think about that for just a second. Utah does not have the ability to manage over 2/3 of our state. Compare that, and you can see the map behind us, to other states like Connecticut, New York, and Rhode Island, where the federal government controls less than 1% of the land. In Delaware, Maine, Massachusetts, Ohio, it's less than 3%. As the federal government continues to close roads in our state and restrict access against Utah's wishes, it is obvious to all of us that the federal government has increasingly failed to keep our lands accessible and properly managed. Today, we are here to talk about letting Utah manage Utah's land. I want to be very clear about some things here. Utah is absolutely committed to keeping public lands in public hands and locally controlled. Utah deserves priority when it comes to managing its land. Utahns are best positioned to understand and respond to the unique needs of our environment and communities. It is time that we stand for our land. Today, after decades of legal analysis, Utah filed a landmark public lands lawsuit asking the United States Supreme Court to address whether the federal government can simply hold unappropriated lands within a state indefinitely. Our legal action is a statewide effort with support from leaders, experts, and advocates, and Utahns all across the state. With this lawsuit, we are asking the Supreme Court to weigh in on a critical question. This is a question we and many Western states have had for decades. This land matters to our people, to all of us. This is the land of the state of Utah. I can tell you, as somebody who grew up as a child recreating on this land with my family, hunting and fishing, herding sheep on this land with my family, it's been a tragedy to see what this administration and past administrations have done to our land. Closing down roads have been open for generations. Places where people went to recreate, to spend time with their families, are no longer accessible. Now, I also want to be very clear. We are not trying to take this land away. We're not trying to privatize this land. We're actually trying to manage it in a way that will better help the environment, that will help the people of Utah. If you really like all the smoke coming from big fires in California that have destroyed all the air quality gains that we've made as a country over the past few years, then you should be opposed to what we're trying to do. But if you actually want to manage this land in a way that is better for the environment and better for all of us, then you should be supportive of what we're trying to accomplish here. Now, I also want to be crystal clear that we're not talking about appropriated lands, and you'll hear more about that. We're not talking about national parks. We're not talking about national monuments. We're not talking about national forests. We're only talking about unappropriated lands, which is about half of the federal lands in our state. This is the time that we have been preparing for. I so appreciate the governors who have gone before me, the legislators that have gone before you, the attorneys who have worked on this for decades as well. So many people going back, again, not just years, but decades, back into the 70s and even before that, dealing with this problem and this issue. And today we have an opportunity to finally do something about it. Now, I'll turn the time over to Attorney General Sean Reyes to discuss the landmark legal action. Then we will hear from Senate President Stuart Adams, and we will end with remarks from House Speaker Mike Schultz. Mr. Attorney General.
Thank you, Governor Cox. Thank you for your leadership on public lands. I want to say your public lands team at PLIPCO is amazing, led by Reg Johnson. So many wonderful public servants there. They've been tremendous partners to work with. I would also like to credit President Adams, Speaker Schultz, and many other legislators for prioritizing public lands and leading on the policy and funding side of these critical issues. And to so many city and county officials and everyday Utahns, some of you who are here today, thank you for your loud voices to stand up for Utah lands. Now, I may be a bit repetitive of some of the things the governor said, but I think it merits talking about and making sure that we understand. I'll try to cover some areas that he did not. On a personal note, over more than a decade serving as Utah's Attorney General, there are few issues that have been as consistent in our legal defense of the state as that of Utah's public lands. Whether it's our fight to keep open access to Utah roads in RS 2477 litigation, or opposing resource management plans that would cut off grazing, hunting, and destroy the livelihoods of many ranching families. When it comes to public lands, I believe every citizen of Utah and millions of annual visitors directly benefit from the stunning landscapes that surround us. I also believe Utahns understand our responsibility and stewardship to honor and protect these lands. We're proud of our magnificent national parks, forests, and other congressionally designated areas. But as the governor pointed out, they represent only half of all federally controlled land in Utah. The other half, about 34% of our total state territory, is unappropriated land that the US government is simply holding on to without properly reserving it for any designated purpose. This hurts Utah on many levels, depriving us of significant rights, resources, and opportunities. And that's why today we filed a historic lawsuit asking the US Supreme Court to address, once again, whether the federal government can simply hold unappropriated lands within a state indefinitely over the objection of that state. It's a simple question, it's an elegant one, and we're hoping the Supreme Court will give us an answer. Nothing in the text of the Constitution authorizes such an inequitable practice or relationship. In fact, the framers of the Constitution carefully limited federal power to hold land within states. But current federal land policy violates state sovereignty and offends the most fundamental notions of federalism. Again, today's lawsuit has nothing to do with our cherished national parks or other congressionally designated areas. Instead, our case focuses specifically on unappropriated land, that 34% or 18.5 million acres controlled by the Bureau of Land Management that serves no enumerated power. And under the 10th Amendment, when powers are not delegated, they're reserved back to the states. The time has come, ladies and gentlemen, to defend Utah's history. In 1896, Utah joined the Union as an equal to her sister states. Yet today, as the governor again pointed out very accurately, Utah is not close to being equal. Many other states have only 1 or 2% of their territory under federal control, and you heard the number before. Almost 70% is that number in Utah. Utah cannot manage, police, or care for more than 2/3 of its own territory because it's controlled by people who don't live in Utah, who aren't elected by Utah citizens, and not responsive to our local needs. Because of this federal dominance, Utah cannot tax federal government holdings. It cannot exercise eminent domain as needed for critical infrastructure like public roads and transportation or communication systems. And it cannot even exercise legislative authority over the purposes for which the land may be used. Now, for a moment, let me try to illustrate the inherent unfairness of the situation with an analogy that is admittedly not perfect, but was approved by my 14 and 16-year-olds that might help explain the abusive nature of this relationship. All right, if you're with me, assume you're a homeowner in a development with other homeowners. You share some common areas, a swimming pool, some pickleball courts, and walking paths. Together, you decide to create a homeowners association, or HOA, to help control and manage these areas. You don't mind the HOA creating some rules that even govern your own property, like you can't park a bunch of trucks on your front lawn because that's an eyesore against the common good. But let's say over time, the HOA keeps giving itself more and more power. And one day you wake up and you realize that the HOA controls almost 70% of your property. The HOA makes up rules about when you can use your backyard or your garden or even parts of your own home. Or worse, they won't let you use them at all. They tell you how, when, or if you can eat, sleep, or recreate. Your front lawn may be dying and full of weeds, but guess what? It's controlled by the HOA. And they tell you that you can't put weed and feed that you bought on what's left of your grass. Now, you're fine with them managing the pool and pickleball areas. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what the HOA was created to do. It helps the whole community. But how long would you let them control your home and your yard, and in many ways, your life, before you said, enough is enough? Especially if that HOA's management company were dictating rules remotely from another state. Now, I know this scenario sounds like a bad dystopian novel, but this is the reality for Utah. The HOA is obviously the federal government. It was created with limited powers for specific purposes, but it's no longer just managing the pool. It wants everything. Utah is the homeowner, beholden to an entity in Washington, D.C. that controls Utah's fences, yard, house, and in many senses, its way of life. I could go on and on with the HOA allegory, but I'll get back to the mechanics of the lawsuit. Because our case is a legal dispute directly between Utah and the federal government, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over the matter. We hope that the court exercises that jurisdiction to review this issue. And no, HOAs are not mentioned in any of our pleadings. To present our case to the High Court, we've retained Paul Clement and Aaron Murphy, some of the preeminent Supreme Court advocates of our day. Mr. Clement is a former Solicitor General of the United States who has more than 100 appearances before the U.S. Supreme Court, including in Loper Bright, Hobby Lobby, and other historic cases. Ms. Murphy has many successful Supreme Court arguments of her own. Their law firm complements perfectly the skill and constitutional expertise of the dedicated lawyers and legal professionals in PLIPCO and the AG's office. Utah's former Solicitor General Melissa Holyoke and Utah's current Solicitor General Stan Purser, elite attorneys in their own right, have helped me make this case a top priority for our office. In closing, public lands need to stay in public hands, and those hands belong to Utahns. Our nation was founded by people who were tired of a government that was far away and did not understand their needs and concerns. They chose a government of the people, by the people, and for the people so that Americans could govern themselves. Today, we ask that this principle be applied to Utah to allow us to prove that the stewardship of our public lands functions best in the hands of local leaders. Utahns will have a brighter future in this great state when Utahns themselves have a greater role in the stewardship of their public lands. I'll turn the time over now to Senate President Stuart Adams.
Wow, I want to thank the Attorney General's office, and it's great to be here with him. What a great job you've done, but also to stand united with the Governor Speaker. We're united on this issue. Utah stands for our lands. We have incredible lands in Utah. I'm fortunate enough to be a fifth-generation Utahn. I read about the early settlers that came to Utah, how much they valued the land and how much they worked and what the land meant to them. But I'm fortunate also right now to live very close to federal land. From my house to the federal land to Fernwood Park is a few hundred feet. I can be on a trail on federal land in almost just a few minutes. One of my favorite hikes is to take my grandkids up a canyon. You'll probably know that, Adams Canyon, named after my great-great-great-grandfather. Nothing's better than to be walking up a trail with a stream, with your grandkids, with your kids, out in the outdoors, experiencing what happens when you're out of not doing video games, you're actually doing something fun. What a great experience it is, and we have that opportunity in Utah, and we love our lands. Not only do we love them, but Fernwood Park has a great trailhead, and it's owned by the Forest Service. But in Utah, we want to share that Adams Canyon that I want to possess myself, but we want to share it with others. And what we've done, if you look at Highway 89, when we developed Highway 89, one of the biggest trailheads for Adams Canyon is constructed by UDOT, our state agency. We want to share those public lands with other people. And people have come from all over the state to share that canyon with me. We look back and, we don't want to control our federal parks. But I remember the day when the federal government shut down our federal parks. And who came to the rescue? Utah. We love our lands. We want to share them with others. I heard from people around the world with tears in their eyes how they couldn't visit those parks. We, in Utah, nobody can control or nobody can manage the land better than the people that are next to it. I think we can do a better job than anyone else. The primary caregiver should be the state of Utah, supported by the federal government, not the other way around. You've seen 70% of our lands controlled by the federal government. That needs to change. We can manage those grounds, those lands. We will keep them open to the public. We will do a better job than anybody can outside of Utah. In Utah, we ought to have control of those lands. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Governor Cox, Attorney General Reyes, President Adams, and I want to thank all the county commissioners and legislators as well. Utah is very lucky to have your leadership, and appreciate the passion around Utah's public lands. I'll ask you to forgive me for just a moment and not being in a suit and tie with you here today. I wanted to speak to you today as Mike Schultz, and who Mike Schultz is, not as Speaker Mike Schultz. And I hope the passion for the public lands comes across, because I'm a very passionate person about the state of Utah, as well as our public lands. For as long as I can remember, I've spent time on Utah's lands, camping, fishing, hiking, and hunting with my family. As we've continued that tradition with my own family, just like many other families across the state, my deep-rooted love for the outdoors continues to burn in me strong today. When I'm not at the Capitol, you'll likely find me on my family ranch, growing crops, raising livestock, and most importantly, enjoying our public lands in the great outdoors. This attack from the federal government is serious, and it affects every single Utahn that loves our land and lives in Utah. Under the control of the federal government, and with Washington bureaucrats in DC making every public lands decision, our public lands have become less and less public. Now, I'm glad we have this map here so we can get a generalization of where our public lands are being managed from. Right here. That's where Utah's public land is being managed from. It's not right. People who live 2,000 miles away from Utah should not be making these decisions. And rather than prioritizing the needs of the state, the federal government continues to give out-of-state special interest groups what they want, and that's closing off access to our public lands. In fact, the federal government has launched an all-out campaign to limit access on public lands. Over 500 miles of roads have recently been closed in Utah on our public lands. They are in the process of closing down thousands and thousands of miles more. Just in San Rafael, currently are being proposed 964 acres of roads being closed in San Rafael. That is the distance from Salt Lake City to Omaha, Nebraska. That's just in one portion. There are several other areas that they're doing the same thing in, all across the state. And I haven't even mentioned the new public lands rule, which is beyond devastating to Utah, as it will unnecessarily restrict millions of acres of lands by adopting a hands-off, don't touch approach to land management. It's wrong. Even if you believe that Washington bureaucrats should manage the land 2,000 miles away, you simply have to admit they have not done a very good job. The federal government consistently demonstrates their incompetence in properly managing our land. Their failures in wildfire control, wildlife habitat, flood prevention, and water management are glaring examples. When a crisis strikes, like a raging wildfire, spring runoff, flooding, Utah is significantly hindered by the red tape and is forced to seek permission before deploying critical resources needed to protect the land and protect the citizens of the state. The gross federal overreach hurts Utah and Utahns. We're beyond done letting outside interests manage the public lands with little to no regard for Utah or the citizens of this state. In Utah, conservation does not mean locking the gate and walking away, as the federal government seems to believe that it does. Instead, we recognize the value of implementing on-the-ground active land management to make our lands and natural resources more resilient. So I ask you this: who is better suited to manage our lands, Utahns or unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.? To me, the answer is simple and it's common sense. Utah has a proven track record of effectively managing state land to benefit all Utahns and to preserve that land for future generations. And that's the most important thing, I think, is making sure we preserve something that we can hand off to our kids and our grandkids and their kids and grandkids. So let's stand up and protect our land for multiple uses for the generations to come. Thank you, Governor Cox.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to our leadership team in the state of Utah. I just want to end with 2 points. I too want to thank Plipco, Reg Johnson, and his team, the Public Lands Group that has been working on this for so many years. I want to thank all of you who have been so patient in getting us to this point. I know there has been a lot of anxiety around this, people who wanted to file this lawsuit earlier, and we understand that. We had to get the right timing on this, and we feel like we are there. Now, this is the time. We have the right legal team, as Attorney General Reyes mentioned. We have the right circumstances, as we've seen an administration that, again, is closing down hundreds of miles of road, and as Speaker Schultz mentioned, is proposing thousands of miles of road closure moving forward. This is the right time to bring this lawsuit and determine once and for all, what does the Constitution say, what we think it says, or does it not? I think even if you're on the other side of this argument, that you too should want some final clarity around this. And we now have that opportunity to get that clarity. The second thing I just want to say is we've talked a lot about recreation and the importance of that, and it is absolutely important. I just want to say a word to our farmers and ranchers. The reason that we have these amazing public lands, these incredible vistas, is because they have been preserved, not by the federal government. Long before the federal government stepped in, they were preserved by the people who lived here, by the people who settled here, by the people who work this land, by the people who make their living on this land. And they need our help and support. We have unelected bureaucrats. And I want us to really understand what that means. There is nothing in the Constitution that says, one, that the federal government should be making these decisions in the first place. But even if we assume that that is the case, that these decisions would not be made by Congress. I want to be very clear on this as well. Congress is not closing these roads. What is happening out there is people who have no idea, no tie to the land, no tie to the history, no tie to our state, are making these decisions that are causing real harm, not just fun harm, economic harm, destroying the livelihoods of our farmers and ranchers who have preserved these lands. We are here to support them. We're not going to see any more reductions in AUMs across our state. We're here, we have your backs because you've had ours for all these years. So this is an exciting time. This is an exciting time for all of us. Something, again, I know many of you, again, thank you, you've been working on this for a long, long time. It's an historic day for Utah, and we will give everything we have to make sure we get the right result. I want to thank you all for coming. I know we've agreed to do one-on-ones with the media out there, and so we are all available, and we'll be able to meet with you and answer your questions. Thanks for coming, everyone.